Let's talk about short rows. Short rows are incredibly useful in knitting for creating a bunch of different shapes and solutions to problems. Short rows are the basis of this standard sock heel. Short rows are the way that you create shapes like this, and they're used a lot in garments for bust shaping and in shawls for creating lovely curves. And short rows are, of course, the basis of my beloved Lizard Ridge blanket. When we say short rows, what we mean is, at the simplest level, you knit part way across the row, and then you stop, then you turn, and you start working back. And that's a short row, because I didn't go all the way across. But you've heard of these things called wrap and turn, and Japanese methods and German methods, and the deal is this. If I lie this on the table and look at it, what I've done with the short row is I've worked 2 extra rows on this section of the stitches, which is good. You can see how you could start to create shapes with that. But there is a problem. If I were to just knit now all the way across, I'd get a hole. And you can see it here. I did it, and I did it in the worsted weight just so you could get a sense of even how it looks in a finer weight yarn. We've got a hole, and you've got a funny misshapen stitch where I just knitted across. So the whole deal behind these other methods is how to solve that problem, how to disguise the hole. So instead of just turning around, what we do is we use a maneuver to help us set up to disguise the hole. The classic is the wrap and turn. The wrap and turn goes like this, although there are some variations. Here's how I do it. Slip the next stitch over to the right hand needle. I bring the yarn, in this case to the front, to the other side, and I move the stitch back to where it came from. Okay? And what I've done is I've created a little collar of yarn around the base of that stitch. So these were the stitches that I knitted. This is actually my turn point here, and I've created, if I turn around, and I now bring the yarn to the front. It's always harder to see on the purl side. I bring the yarn to the front so it's in purl position, and as soon as I purl that stitch, what you're going to see is this wrapped stitch snugs up to its neighbor. And the whole idea is that you can use those wraps to avoid the holes, pun intended. On the purl side, the method is the same. You move the stitch over, and you're always slipping purl-wise, so you're not twisting the stitch. You move the yarn to the other side, and then you put the stitch back. So there's a wrap, and then I turn. And then you just, and this one's pretty instinctive, you just move the yarn to where you need it to be for the next stitch. And what you've got is we've got a wrap here around the base of that stitch, a little collar, if you will, and we've got the same thing. Let me knit a stitch so it's a little bit clearer. You've got the same thing here. Okay. An important note about wrap and turn. I've read and seen different instructions for it. They're very minor differences. Some people move the yarn before they slip the stitch. I tend to move the yarn after I slip the stitch, and there does not seem to be a lot of difference between in the end result between the two processes. So I would say choose the one that makes sense to you. For me, I like slip the stitch, move the yarn, slip the stitch back. Okay. So what happens now? As I'm knitting across, when I find a wrap stitch, well, instinct would say I would just knit it, right? But there's a problem. That wrap is sitting on the front of the work, and that is, well, not attractive. If I undo that. In the instructions, we might describe this maneuver as working the wrapped stitch together with the wrap, or hiding the wraps, because what we want to do is we want to pick up the wrap. And again, there are slightly different techniques and different ways of describing this instruction. Here's my favorite method. I just scoop up the wrap from underneath, and I put the needle into the stitch that it's wrapping and knit them together. And this is where I end up using my thumb to make sure I'm coming through both of them. Okay. And what that's done is flipped the wrap to the wrong side. Okay. So the wrap has been hidden. Or again, we might describe that as working the wrap stitch together with the wrap. On the purl side, let's do another wrap and turn here. move the stitch, move the yarn, move the stitch, and turn your work. All right, and then I'm going to work back here. So you see there's the wrap. See that loose loop of yarn? It's exaggerated, of course, in the very bulky yarn here, but that's what that wrap looks like when it's pushed to the wrong side. Okay, and so here's the thing about the wraps on the purl side. I find them pretty difficult to see. I'm always ending up flipping it over and looking just to make sure that I find the wrap. This is where stitch markers can come in handy, because you can always clip a stitch marker around the wrap when you do it to help you find them. And what you want to do on the purl side here is you want to, again, scoop it up from underneath. So you're with the tip of the needle swooping up under and popping it onto the left hand needle, and then purling those two together. Okay, and that again brings that wrap, and it's exaggerated in the bulky yarn. It would not look so big at all in a standard weight yarn here. What you've done is you've brought that wrap to the wrong side so that you can't see it on the right side. So there's a wrap before it's been worked, and I've got stitches here with the wraps that have been worked. They still look a little bit stretched out, that's true. They're never absolutely smooth and perfect. Let me just finish the row so I can turn this over. But what that allows you to do is it creates that curve and it hides the wrap. So instead of the wrap being visible, you've got the stitches there with the wraps just thrown to the wrong side.